I stood on my parents' front porch in Oregon. The smell of damp pine and funeral lilies still clung to my black uniform. I was gripping a thick envelope from my grandfather's lawyer, a document containing the deeds to 3 organic farms and a mansion in Manhattan. I was about to walk in and share the news, but then I heard my mother's voice through the wood. She was not grieving. She was calculating. "The doctor will be here tomorrow," my father, David, whispered. "With her military record, one post-traumatic stress diagnosis is all we need to secure guardianship. Then those assets are ours." Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. I would love to know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Anger did not burn hot this time. It was clinical. As a tactical analyst for 5 years, I had learned that the loudest person in the room is usually the one losing. I did not storm in. I did not scream. Instead, I reached into my pocket, tapped the voice recorder on my phone, and took a slow, measured breath. I needed to become exactly who they wanted to see, a broken soldier exhausted by war and grief. I needed them to believe their trap was working. I opened the door and let my shoulders sag. "I am home," I murmured, my voice intentionally thin. My mother, Emily, rushed toward me, her arms open in a gesture that felt less like a hug and more like a net. "Oh, Olivia, you look pale. You must be so tired," she said, her voice dripping with that manufactured concern I now recognized as a predator smile. I let her guide me to the couch. I sat where she told me to sit. I drank the water she gave me. I played the part of the fragile porcelain doll they intended to shatter. Inside, my mind was already running a balance sheet. For years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family. I had sent home 70% of my paychecks from every deployment, believing I was protecting our heritage. For years, I had poured my kindness into a glass they kept breaking. I was done being their safety net. This was not a home. It was a prison without bars. They saw my silence as weakness, a symptom of a mind failing under stress. They were already counting the assets I held in my bag, discussing them in whispers while I sat 2 feet away. People often ask why victims stay silent, why they do not fight back the moment the betrayal is revealed. They do not understand the invisible chain. When you have spent your life being told you are the problem, the difficult one, you learn to wait. My silence was not a surrender. It was a surveillance mission. I was reading the room, identifying the exits and locating the enemy's weak points. In the special ops world, we call it shaping the battlefield. You let the opponent think they're winning right up until the moment you take the ground out from under them. Everything stayed silent for days, but in my head, their words kept echoing. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and stale coffee, the sense of a home that had spent my life as its primary currency. For 5 years, I was not a daughter. I was a high-yield asset on their private ledger. I vividly remember the desert heat, the crushing weight of my gear, and the rhythmic thud of mortars in the distance. Every time my military pay hit my account, I performed a ritual of self-sabotage. I transferred 70% of it back to this house. I thought I was protecting our heritage. I thought I was the guardian of the 3 organic farms my grandfather had built with his own 2 hands. My father would call me on secure lines, his voice dripping with a calculated, frantic energy. He told me the interest rates were climbing, that the suppliers were at the door, and that the family business was one missed payment away from total collapse. I treated those calls like mission briefings. I believed that love was a contract, and I was honored to be the one who kept the terms. I can still feel the grit of sand in my teeth when I think about those months in the field. I would sit in the back of a transport, sweating through my uniform, and check my banking app just to make sure the wire to my father had cleared. It gave me a sense of purpose. I felt like I was the foundation holding the Henderson family together. I was the one in the line of fire, but in my mind, they were the ones I was shielding. But while I was eating sand and counting rations, my brother Tyler was upgrading his lifestyle. I look at him now, sitting in that armchair with a phone that costs more than my first month's hazard pay. The light reflects off his pristine designer watch, a piece of jewelry that represents 3 months of my life in a combat zone. He bragged about his new truck earlier, a $60,000 machine that I effectively bought for him with the money I thought was saving the farm. My sister Kayla is no better. She is already checking flight prices to New York, whispering to our mother about which Manhattan boutique she wants to visit once the mansion is secured. They do not see the sacrifice. They only see the math. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years. They looked at my deployments and did not see service. They saw a reliable revenue stream. My family was not a support system. It was a subscription service, and I was the only one footing the bill. The peeling paint on the porch was not a sign of struggling finances. It was a sign of moral rot. They had the resources, my resources, but they preferred the instant gratification of luxury vacations and designer clothes over the maintenance of the very legacy they claimed to cherish. I realized today that I was not protecting a home, I was funding a heist. At exactly 10 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. It was a precise, clinical sound that signaled the start of their final offensive. David opened the door with the practiced solemnity of a man conducting a funeral, greeting a man named Dr. Collins with a firm, business-like handshake. Collins did not look like a healer. He looked like a board member in a mid-range pharmaceutical company, expensive jacket, polished shoes, and eyes that held the kind of warmth that was bought and paid for. He smiled at me, a condescending, narrow-eyed expression that people usually reserve for small children or wounded animals. "You must be Olivia," he said softly, sitting across from me and opening a leather portfolio. "Your family has been very worried about your transition back into civilian life." I nodded slowly, letting my gaze drift to a point somewhere over his shoulder. I allowed my hands to tremble, just enough to be visible, but not enough to look like a performance. I'm tired," I whispered. Emily sat beside me, her hand a heavy, possessive weight on my shoulder. "Doctor, she has been so jumpy. She stays in the dark for hours. We are terrified she is going to hurt herself or make a mistake with the legacy Grandpa left." Collins noted something in his file. Confusion, disorientation, difficulty managing complex tasks, these are common symptoms of severe combat-related trauma. It might be wise to consider temporary measures, support, oversight, someone to handle the heavy lifting while you heal. I looked up, letting my gaze go glassy and unfocused. Like guardianship? The room went cold. Emily laughed, a light, nervous sound that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, honey, don't use such heavy words. We're just talking about a little help." But the help started immediately. "Olivia, honey," Emily said, reaching for my bag, "I'll take your phone. You don't need the distraction of notifications right now." And David had the car keys. "We don't want you driving in this state. It's for your own safety." I watched a hand close around my phone. I watched David slip my keys into his pocket. They were stripping me of my connection to the world, one item at a time, and they were doing it with smiles on their faces. This is the trap of normalized cruelty. It does not always look like a blow to the face or a shouted insult. Often it looks like concern. It is the slow, steady erosion of your boundaries until you're convinced that your own autonomy is a burden. They had turned my service, my sacrifice, and my very identity into a weapon against me. They had spent years convincing themselves that this was for my own good. But in reality, it was for their own greed. They were not protecting me, they were liquidating me. They were transforming a daughter into a portfolio of assets they could trade and sell. I sat back, letting the fragile slump leave my shoulders. My posture was not just better, it was military grade. Dr. Collins stopped writing mid-sentence. Emily's hand on my shoulder twitched as I leaned away from her touch. The air in the room did not just change, it solidified. David frowned, his hand instinctively reaching toward the car keys in his pocket. "Olivia, honey, you're getting worked up again," he started, his voice a low, condescending hum. I did not let him finish. "You were invited here under false pretenses," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a cold blade. "There is no medical emergency, there is no consent, and there is absolutely no authority." I reached under a throw pillow and pulled out my iPad, the one I had been using under the covers at 3 in the morning. I did not wait for David to yell or for Tyler to make a joke. I tapped a link and the screen filled with the sharp professional face of Counselor Hayes. David's face was a map of confusion that quickly morphed into fear. "Counselor," I said, my eyes locked on my father, "are the assets secure?" Hayes did not smile. He looked like a man who enjoyed the precise execution of a tactical plan. "Airtight, Olivia," he replied, his voice booming through the iPad speakers. "The 3 organic farms here in Oregon and the Manhattan mansion have been officially locked into an irrevocable trust. You are the sole beneficiary. Your parents, your brother, and your sister have no legal standing to touch, view, or even inquire about those deeds. Any attempt to file for guardianship will be met with a preemptive injunction." Emily let out a small, strangled gasp. "Olivia, how could you? We were just trying to protect you." I did not look at her. I kept my gaze on David, who was staring at the iPad as if it were a live grenade. "This was not protection," I said, my tone clinical. "It was a hostile takeover. But you forgot one thing about tactical analysts. We study the paper trail before we engage." I did not just secure the farms. I audited my own life. Hayes cleared his throat on the screen, his expression turning grim. "Actually, there is a secondary matter, Olivia. During the forensic audit of your military savings account, we found a series of irregular withdrawals occurring over the last 18 months. It appears David Henderson forged your signature to withdraw $450,000. Our records show the funds were wired directly to settle high-interest personal loans and gambling debts under the name of Tyler Henderson." The silence that followed was heavy and final. David's skin turned a sickly shade of gray. Tyler's foot stopped its habitual bouncing. The smugness on his face did not just disappear, it shattered. I rubbed my eyes, but I was not looking for regret. I was looking for clarity. This was not a family dinner. It was a criminal discovery. David had not just overdrafted my compassion, he had stolen the literal price of my survival. $450,000 of hazard pay spent on Tyler's bad bets. "That's a felony, David," I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. "Forging the signature of a service member to steal federal funds is a serious crime. You were not worried about my mental state. You were worried I would check the balance and realize you had emptied the vault." I leaned back, the fabric of the couch no longer feeling like a cage, but like the command chair of a fortress. I was not the daughter they needed to manage. I was the creditor they could never afford to pay back. This was not revenge. This was accounting, and the interest was about to become unbearable. The doorbell rang for the 3rd time that morning. It was not a doctor or a co-conspirator. It was the sound of the perimeter closing. David tried to stand, his hands still clenching my car keys, but his legs seemed to have forgotten their function. 2 uniformed officers and a woman in a sharp gray suit from Adult Protective Services stepped into the living room. The air in the house, once heavy with the smell of lemon cleaner, now smelled like the end of a long, coordinated lie. The woman from the agency did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She looked at the locked guest room door, the missing phone on the charger, and the way Emily was still hovering over me like a jailer. "Miss Henderson," she said, looking directly at me, "we received your recordings and the documentation from Counselor Hayes. Are you being held here against your will?" I stood up, my movement fluid and deliberate. I reached out my hand. David looked at the officers, then at the floor, and slowly placed my car keys into my palm. I said, my voice steady, "but the tactical situation has changed." Emily collapsed into the armchair, her face blotchy and distorted by tears that finally looked real, not because she was sorry, but because she was terrified. "Olivia, please," she wailed, reaching for my hand. "We are your parents. You can't do this to your own blood. We were only thinking about the future of this family." I looked at her, then at the mahogany table and the crystal glasses. This was the illusion of power. From an empty wallet, for years they had played the role of the successful, elite Henderson family. But that status was a facade. They had rented it using my hazard pay and my grandfather's silence. They mistook my bank account for their own character. Without my money to bridge the gap between their ambition and their reality, they were not powerful. They were just a group of people who had overdrafted their moral credit until they were bankrupt in every sense that mattered. "You are not protecting a family," I said, looking at my father. "You are managing a failing business, and I have decided to pull my investment." I took a single sheet of paper from my bag and laid it on the table. It was not a medical waiver. It was a formal notice of foreclosure. "Counselor Hayes didn't just find your forged signature, David. He found the secondary mortgage you secretly took out 18 months ago. Since you haven't made a payment in 90 days, the bank was moving toward foreclosure. I didn't just secure the farms, I used a holding company to purchase the mortgage note from the bank directly. I am no longer just your daughter, I am your lender." David's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He was staring at the legal header of the document. "I am the owner of this property now," I said, my tone as cold as a winter deployment. "I have given you exactly 7 days to sign this voluntary vacate agreement and move out. If you do, I will waive the $450,000 you stole and won't press criminal charges for forgery. If you are still here on the 8th day, the sheriff will handle the formal eviction, and I will hand over the evidence of your fraud to the district attorney." Tyler started to say something about legal rights, but one look from the officers silenced him. They had seen the bank statements. They had heard the recordings of them plotting to lock me away. There was no path back to the sensible daughter they thought they could manipulate. I walked toward the door, my boots clicking firmly on the hardwood floor I had paid to refinish 3 years ago. I did not look back at the begging or all the excuses. I did not need their permission to leave, because I had already taken the door with me. I moved into the Manhattan mansion quietly. There was no public announcement and no social media posts to mark the occasion. It was just the simple, heavy sound of a key turning in a lock that finally belonged to me alone. That first night, I slept on a mattress on the floor with the windows wide open, listening to the city roar below. It felt like taking off a heavy rucksack I had not realized I had been carrying for 5 long years of war and another lifetime of family expectation. The weight was gone, replaced by a strange, intoxicating mix of loneliness and absolute relief. I did not sell the 3 organic farms in Oregon. Instead, I transformed them into something my grandfather would have actually respected. I established the Olivia Henderson Foundation, a specialized sanctuary for veterans navigating the treacherous waters of financial abuse. We provide forensic, accounting, and legal services for those whose families mistook their service for a blank check. Grandpa was right. These properties were not just trophies, they were responsibilities. I hired management teams who prioritized transparency and fair wages over the quick profit my parents had craved. The income now flows steadily and predictably, but it serves to build lives instead of funding Tyler's gambling debts or Kayla's luxury vacations. This was the ultimate form of justice, not the foreclosure of my parents' house, but the creation of a legacy that actually meant something. Real revenge is not about how much you can burn down, it is about how much you can grow in the ashes of their betrayal. While David and Emily were busy performing family for an audience that had finally seen through the facade, I was busy building a sanctuary for the invisible. I realized then that I had stopped being a daughter to be managed and had become a woman who defines her own worth. I had returned their lessons of conditional love, wrapped in a foreclosure notice, and moved forward into a future they could no longer touch. A few months later, I returned to that hill in Oregon. I stood under the shade of the old oak tree on the edge of the property, watching the sun tilt toward evening. The silence here did not feel heavy anymore. It felt full. I took a deep breath of the mountain air and realized, for the first time in my life, I was not waiting for a signature or permission to exist. Grandpa, I did okay. I did not just protect the assets, I protected the person you saw when nobody else was looking. Olivia's story is a testament that silence isn't weakness, it's tactical preparation for absolute justice. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another dramatic journey of reclaiming one's true self.